The night Ruth became the wife of Boaz, Bethlehem glowed with celebration. Oil lamps flickered like tiny stars across the village, and music drifted through the warm air. Laughter rose from every corner. To the people, it was a wedding. To heaven, it was a strategic victory. A broken lineage had just been restored. A wounded family line had been healed. And a Moabite woman had stepped into a destiny written before she was born. But even as joy filled the streets, something dark stirred beyond what eyes could see. Because every time God advances a bloodline, hell marks it for attack. Ruth lay beside Boaz, wrapped in a peace she had never known. For the first time since her husband had died in Moab, she was no longer afraid of tomorrow. She was no longer a foreigner. She was no longer a beggar in the fields. She was a bride. Yet the story was far from OV. Ruth 4 verse 13 says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son." The Lord gave her conception. That single line carries more power than many realize. It means God himself stepped into her womb. Heaven intervened, because this child was not just a baby. This child was a carrier of promise. Naomi, who had once said, "I went out full and came back empty," now held a grandson in her arms. The women of Bethlehem surrounded her and said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer." They named the child Obed, and with that name, a new chapter of Israel's future began. But not all battles are loud. Some are fought in silence. As Ruth nursed her son, something invisible was being woven into the fabric of history. Obed was growing under the protection of God, but unseen eyes were watching. Because long before David would be hunted by Saul, long before Christ would be hunted by Herod, the spirit that hates redemption was already plotting. This family line was dangerous because it carried the promise of king, the same promise God gave Abraham, the same promise whispered through the prophets. A redeemer was coming through this bloodline, and Ruth was now at the center of it. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The woman who had once been considered unclean, the woman from a cursed nation, the outsider, God had chosen her to bring forth the lineage of salvation. Isaiah 55 verse 8 echoes through her story, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." What man rejected, God exalted. What society overlooked, God crowned. Yet destiny always draws fire. As Obed grew, the joy of Bethlehem grew with him. But every generation that followed would face resistance. Because Satan does not fear ordinary people. He fears bloodlines. And this bloodline had become a direct threat to the kingdom of darkness. Through Obed would come Jesse. Through Jesse would come David. And through David would come the Messiah, who would crush the serpent's head. Genesis 3 verse 15 had already declared it. "He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Ruth's womb had become the battleground of that prophecy. The love story between Ruth and Boaz had transformed into something much larger than romance. It had become warfare. Every laugh in their home was defiance. Every prayer was resisted. Every breath Obed took was proof that God was winning. But the enemy was not done, because he never attacks immediately when God plants a seed. He waits until it begins to grow. And as the child of promise slept in Ruth's arms, forces were already preparing the storms that would try to break this family line. Trials would come, kings would rise, betrayals would shake nations, and blood would be spilled, all because of what began in a barley field with a woman who refused to give up. Ruth had stepped into her happily ever after, but heaven knew the truth, the greatest battle was still ahead. What would happen when this bloodline reached the throne? What unseen war would erupt when David was born? And how would the enemy try to destroy what God had started in Ruth? The years passed in Bethlehem like a quiet stream, yet beneath the calm, history was being shaped. Obed grew strong, a child cradled in the hands of God. Naomi's heart, once broken and bitter, now overflowed with gratitude. She had witnessed the impossible, loss turned into legacy, emptiness filled with life. Ruth, the Moabite widow, had become more than a wife. She had become a mother, a matriarch, a vessel through which God's promise would flow into eternity. Every day she walked through fields once barren in her life. She carried the weight and the wonder of what God had done. But as the scriptures had warned, a line blessed by God is always watched by the enemy. Every step toward destiny summons opposition. Even as Obed took his first steps and learned to speak, a silent storm was gathering. Across the hills of Judah, whispers of jealousy, greed, and pride were moving in the shadows. The seed of a future king had been planted, and the enemy knows. Kings threaten his dominion. The story of Ruth had already overturned the natural order. A foreign widow had inherited honor. A widow had become a mother. A child had been born outside the walls of privilege. And yet, within the plans of heaven, he would become the grandfather of David, Israel's greatest king. Ruth 4 verse 17 reminds us, "The women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be famous in Israel.'" A redeemer had come to Ruth, to Naomi, and to Bethlehem, but the story was not complete. The path from Obed to David, and ultimately to the Messiah, would not be without trials. Betrayals, battles, famine, and fear would mark the journey. Ruth's obedience and faith were the first stones in a road that would stretch across generations. And yet, amid the triumph, Ruth knew something powerful. The same God who had brought her from Moab to Bethlehem, who had taken her from loss to legacy, was still in control. Every grain she had gleaned, every step she had taken, every decision to follow Naomi had been part of a divine plan far greater than her understanding. But the story of redemption always carries suspense, because every life God touches becomes a target. Every legacy that aligns with his promise draws both blessing and attack. As the sun rose over Bethlehem, Ruth looked out over the fields. She held her son Obed close, feeling the warmth of life and the weight of destiny. Somewhere in the distance, unseen forces were gathering, ready to challenge the bloodline of David and, ultimately, the lineage of Christ. The road ahead would not be easy. It would be filled with storms, heartbreaks, and moments that would test faith. But Ruth's story was proof. When God writes a story, no power on earth can stop it. Obed would grow, Jesse would come, David would rise, and the Messiah would walk the earth. Yet Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz did not yet see the full picture. They were building a foundation for something far beyond their own lives, a kingdom that would be eternal. And in that truth lies the life lesson. No matter how dark your past, how barren your fields, or how empty your heart, God can turn your loyalty, your faith, and your obedience into a legacy that changes history. Ruth's journey reminds us that redemption is rarely instant. It is forged in patience, obedience, and trust. It is built grain by grain, step by step, until God's promise is fulfilled. The story does not end here. Generations later, when kings rise and empires clash, the bloodline that began with Ruth will stand as proof that God's plan cannot be thwarted. And every trial she endured, every moment she risked, every act of faith was preparing the way for the greatest love story the world has ever known, the coming of the Messiah. Ruth looked out at the horizon, her heart full, her spirit courageous. And as she held Obed close, she could not have known the full impact of her obedience. She could not know that centuries later, her name would echo in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. But heaven knew, and so do we, because your story, like Ruth's, is still unfolding. Every act of faith, every step of courage, every choice to trust God in the wilderness is writing a legacy that will outlast time itself. Your moment is now. Your grain in the field is not wasted. Your obedience will be rewarded, and your story, like Ruth's, may become part of a greater plan that will change the world. The question is, will you trust God enough to walk it? Thank you, dear viewers, for walking this journey of faith with us. Ruth's story reminds us that no matter how impossible life may seem, God can turn loss into legacy, sorrow into joy, and obedience into a destiny that changes generations. Just like Ruth, your faith, loyalty, and courage are never wasted in God's hands. If this story has touched your heart, strengthened your hope, or reminded you that God is still at work in your life, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Encourage someone by sharing this video, and help us spread the message of God's faithfulness. Don't forget to subscribe to the Word of Eternity, like this video, and share it with friends and family who need a word of encouragement today. Every click, every share, every prayer helps plant seeds of hope that can change lives. Remember, your story is not finished. What feels like a waiting season now may be the very beginning of a miracle. Keep trusting, keep obeying, and keep walking in faith, because God is writing your legacy, just as He wrote Ruth's. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. Your breakthrough is coming. Stay faithful, stay strong, and watch how God moves.